And on the telephone with us this morning, Paul Steigerwald, long time with the Pittsburgh Penguins. But, Paul, you and I go way back, and you didn't even know it, back to the Johnstown Jets days in Johnstown when I was a season ticket holder, and you were the guy calling the action for the Jets. Good morning.
Yeah, well, that was actually the Johnstown Red Wings. They were called the Red Wings that one year.
Oh, they had made the switch then, huh?
Yeah, the Detroit Red Wings owned the team, and so they were actually called the Red Wings. But I could understand why you would think there was Jets still, because the Jets were such a prominent team at that time, of course.
Yeah, well, we were season ticket holders all the way through, the Jets, the Red Wings, and the Wings. But now we're talking about the Penguins. And their wings got clipped a little bit the other day in Washington. Paul, this furor over the Brian Dumoulin thing is not going to slow down at all, is it?
No, but the team is going to have to get past it. I mean, they've already gotten past it. It's stuff that happens in the playoffs. Seems to happen to the Penguins more than any other team in the league. And I think that's because of the way the Penguins like to play. They like to be a skilled team that scores goals and plays the game in a more, I would say, artistic way. And they end up being targets often of the kind of stuff we saw the other day. You look back through the history of the Penguins in the playoffs, they've had a few incidents like that, and even as recently as last year in the Washington series when Matt Niskanen cross-checked Sidney Crosby in the side of the head. So this is stuff that the Penguins seem to receive more than they give, and it just kind of comes with the territory, and I think they've learned to kind of accept it and move on from it so that they can do what they do, which is score goals and win games.
Yeah, well, it does get the fans all fired up, and I don't guess that you're surprised, along with very many people, that the NHL reacted to it, even to the point where, as Deshaun points out today, they actually blame Dumoulin for the hit.
Well, they don't blame him as much as they say that, because he turned his head, he was more vulnerable to it, and therefore the hitter was not able to change his course or alter what he did, which I don't buy, because the hitter is a guy who has a history of doing that stuff. And he's a predatory guy, and I think he was on the prowl there looking to hit Dumoulin, and he made no effort whatsoever to hit him lower or, he was absolutely intent on delivering a blow there. And I think that those guys are quite aware of where they're delivering the blow. I don't think it's one of those things where he couldn't stop himself from doing it. I think he could have if he wanted to.
Paul Steigerwald on the air with us here this morning on Indiana in the Morning. Paul, this particular series against Washington, is there any sort of a different feel to it for you watching it than the previous series where the Penguins have had such a dominant performance against Washington through the playoffs?
Well, no, I think they're all the same. I mean, if you think about it, every series the Penguins have with Washington is a little scary. Last year they had to go 7 games. Back in 2009 when the Penguins won the Cup, they had to go through Washington, and that was a 7-game series. So every time they play Washington, it's hit or miss. I think it'll be the same this year. The Capitals are a really good team. The beauty of the playoffs is, and Bob Johnson said this many years ago, you can lose 3 games and still win the series. And I think the Penguins have a real good feel for, what the ebb and flow is of the playoffs. They understand that sometimes it's not going to go your way, but the idea is to win 4 out of 7. And I think the Capitals are a team that, for whatever reason, they just have a psychological barrier against the Penguins, and I think that the Penguins kind of take advantage of that a little bit. I don't know who's going to diffuse that for Washington. Their goalie, Braden Holtby, could be that guy, but he seems to be more vulnerable than anyone to the psychological problems. And so I think that in the final analysis, the Penguins are the better team with more talent, and I think as a result they'll win the series.
Evgeny Malkin, Carl Hagelin, they have not played yet. Dumoulin is a question mark for tonight, as are those 2 other fellas. How big of a difference would getting 1 or 2 or all 3 of those guys make in a game like tonight's?
Well, getting Gino back would be huge. I think the Penguins are probably going to get a couple of power play opportunities tonight. The way the playoffs often go is that even though the Penguins didn't get the calls they wanted in Game 2, the referees and the officials in the league are quite aware that the Penguins probably got jobbed a little bit, and they would never admit it, but they'll admit it in their actions by probably calling a few more penalties tonight on the Washington Capitals. That's the way it goes, and So I would expect the Penguins to get some power plays, and with Malkin back on the power play, that will make a huge difference. I don't think Hagelin will come back. He skated yesterday, but he wasn't taking contact. So usually they make you go through contact first before you actually come back and play in a game. So it's possible, but I don't think he'll play tonight. And I think Gino will play, and I do think he'll make a huge difference.
Would that difference be as much in the game that Phil Kessel plays as anything else? It seems like those two guys together are so dynamic, and Phil sort of missed them.
Yeah, I agree. I think Phil Kessel's going through something. I'm not sure what it is, but he's not shooting the puck as much as he used to, or does when he's playing well. And I think there's something bothering him. I'm not sure what it is, but it just looks like he's injured to me, because he's not pulling the trigger, and he's not shooting the puck with that amazing velocity that he normally does. But he's a key guy on the power play on that left side. With Malkin playing the right side, they balance each other out. So it makes it very dangerous for the opposition.
It seems to me, watching the series and listening to the national commentators on TV, that they really are trying to play up a weakness on Murray on the glove side high. And maybe that is the weakest component of his game, but I don't really see it as a weakness. Talk about defense for the Penguins, how this group has played, and how much Dumoulin has meant.
Well, I think the defense, has done pretty well. I think as a team, the Penguins have been a little loose defensively against the Capitals. When I watched the game, the first part of the game the other night, they had 20 shots in the first period, and they were just blowing through center ice against the Penguins. They seemed to have too much free reign to bring that puck with speed into the offensive zone. So I think the Penguins have to do a little bit better job of stopping the Capitals in their tracks, maybe slowing them down in their end before they get moving through that neutral zone. And as for the D, it's hard to judge the D sometimes when you have a situation like with the Capitals, with the speed that they play with and the skill, because your defense, if the team's playing well as a five-man unit, the defense can gap up, that's the term they use, where they can kind of step up and tighten that gap between the forwards and the defense so that the opposition doesn't have a lot of room to skate. I think the Penguins' defense has not been able to gap up as much as they'd like because either foreskin, and that's a recipe for disaster. So I think the key for the Penguins is to slow them down off the rush. If you notice, a lot of the goals they've scored have been off the rush, and I think the Penguins need to, basically, prevent them from being able to enter their end with such speed and ease. And if they do that, then they can play a better brand of defense.
We've been talking Penguins Capitals through this segment with Paul Steigerwald. And Paul, down through the years, you've seen a lot of hockey with a lot of different teams, and I know that there have to be some highlights that stand out for you. And I don't know that you've seen the real highlight of this Penguins edition just yet, but think about some of the hockey that you've seen down through the years and the amazing playoff performances. The Penguins have been a really special team for a long time.
It's really amazing. Obviously the ones that stand out are 91 and 92 when we won the Cups, but you can go back to before even the Penguins won the Cup, when they first made the playoffs in the late 80s in that series against the Philadelphia Flyers when Mario had 8 points, and it was just incredible. And then you go to even in the 2000s, the Penguins had some amazing and memorable moments in the playoffs in those years with guys like Jaromir Jagr and Alexei Kovalev and Marty Straka. So I remember it all. I remember the good players that didn't win the Cup, that played at a high level and really an entertaining level throughout the history. The Penguins have had more offensive geniuses, I think, than any other franchise. They have 15 scoring titles, and so we've been very fortunate, night in and night out, to be entertained at the highest level by some of the greatest players, Hall of Famers in the history of the game. It's almost an embarrassment of riches. And but obviously, when you win the Cup, it's nothing like it. The Penguins have won 5. Nobody could have ever imagined that the Penguins would do that back in the 80s when they were struggling as a franchise. So we're very blessed to have Mario at the helm and to have been able to witness all this over the years.
Is this core group of Penguins on this team that has been here for these Stanley Cups, does it compare favorably with the teams from the early 90s?
I think so. I think the early 90s teams had so many Hall of Famers. That was the difference. You had Joe Mullen, Brian Trottier, Kevin Stevens, Rick Tocchet, Larry Murphy, Paul Coffey, guys like that. I mean, they were Hall of Famers in addition to Mario Lemieux, So I think probably this team doesn't measure up in that regard, but there's still a lot of talent, and the talent in general has gotten better in the league, and the league has gotten faster and more difficult to play in. So in that respect, I think that all of the players in this Penguin lineup are probably more skilled on the whole than what we saw back in those days, and that's saying something, because there was some amazing skill on those teams, but it's very difficult to play in today's game. It's a very fast game, and you have to be able to defend, and you have to play a system, and you just have to do things that those guys didn't have to do. Now, in those days, it was more physical. I think there was probably more of a toll taken on players physically back then.
Mm-hmm.
It was more dangerous. I think it was a more vicious game. So in that respect, it was a tougher game to play back in those days. But from a skill standpoint, I think the players are just getting better and better every year.
Yeah, there was a fellow named Parasso who was a pretty vicious goaltender back there for the Penguins for years, too.
Yeah, he was awesome. He was a great goalie, actually, and the Penguins have been blessed with great goaltending, too, over the years.
Yeah. Hey, just one last question for you. I know that you and everybody else lamenting the fact that Ron Francis was let go in Carolina, that's such a shame for such a classy individual, isn't it?
Yeah, he's a good guy, you know what I mean? But it's a tough business, and when you don't win, you don't stay in your job. That's just the nature of the business, and owners own, and general managers manage, coaches coach, and players play. And I think Ron Francis probably more than anybody understands that. He's been a big part of that franchise. They call him Ronnie Franchise, but that franchise has really struggled, and so a change might be a good thing for them down there. I never like to see owners meddle too much. I hope he's not one of those guys. But as for Ronnie, I'm sure he'll be fine. Wouldn't even be surprised me one bit if he ended up in Pittsburgh.
Paul, you've been very generous with your time this morning. I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Okay, Tom. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. There's Paul Steigerwald, the Pittsburgh Penguins, joining us here this morning for a little extended segment of Penguins Talk on Indiana in the Morning. Presented by First Commonwealth Bank, WCCS 101.1 FM and AM 1160.